Okay. Well, the audio level is moving on my screen, so I'm hoping that you can hear me. But I'm going to need someone to tell me that they can actually hear me. And that's the great thing about having 4 whole people watching right now, is that either Brent, Chert, Crazy Carl, one of you can tell me if you can hear me. But there is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't, because I can see the little green meter. Audio is working now. Thank you very much. In that case, Brent, and thank you for your help there, we are going to reset. We are going to start again. Welcome to the show. Can we just chop the first 3 minutes off the replay? I'm being told that I may be able to do that in post. So thank you for your help so far. What I said previously that you missed because Restream decided to just stop working for a second, is that this is the first time I've ever done anything like this. One of these weird kind of just talk to you streams. As you probably know, whether you listen to the podcast or watch the EPT live streams or have watched anything else that I've done, be that live or pre-recorded in the last 10 or 15 years, I'm normally working with someone, right? I've got a co-host or at the very least a guest who I'm interviewing and speaking to. But here I am speaking into a microphone, into a camera, and this is a very, very new experience for me. But as I said before, and now you're hearing me say it out loud, it is meant to be a two-way street because the idea is that you can talk to me via the live chat. So yes, you can subscribe to join in the conversation. I'm sure there are going to be some people who discover this stream down the line who are watching a replay, in which case you're going to have to use normal comments. You're not going to be able to join in the live chat. But I'm thrilled to see that we have got some people here, albeit just a handful. And yes, I'm going to shout him out again because Crazy Carl was the first guy here. Great to have you with us, Carl. Great to have you with me today. And Carl says, I do love the books behind James. I'd love to tell you they're mine, but I'm at my girlfriend's place in LA, so I have to give her credit for the book collection. And hello to Chert, who is watching from Slovenia. Also couldn't hear me, I know, but the audio is working now. We've established that. Yes, and hello as well to New Coart Ceramics Bonaire. Yes, can hear you new. I am so glad. So how is everyone? How was everyone's new year? How's everyone's first 2 weeks, 3 weeks now? It's the 21st of the month. How have the first 3 weeks of the year been for you? Hope it's been a good start to 2025. Not going to lie, it has been a very weird start to the year for me because as this stream advertises, this is live from Hollywood, which is a slight exaggeration because I'm actually in the Valley. I'm actually in Sherman Oaks right now, so just down the road from Hollywood. But I am in the greater Los Angeles area. I am in LA County. And as I'm sure you are aware, this has been a very strange 10 days, 2 weeks for Los Angeles, a tragic 2 weeks for this part of Southern California. And I came here straight after New Year. I was in Lisbon for New Year and then came here the following weekend. So I think it was the 3rd, 4th of January that I flew here. And I remember being really, really smug because anytime you escape London in January to go somewhere which is more temperate, which is less freezing, you kind of feel I'm winning at life. And the weather in London was horrific. I got out just before the real snowstorms, the real big freeze set in, which was clearly going to disrupt public transport systems, was clearly going to disrupt flights and just make it a miserable place generally to be. So I'm kind of ashamed to admit it, was kind of lording it over some of my friends back in the UK that, you're stuck in freezing cold London and I'm going to be in Southern California. I'm going to be in sunny LA for January. Lucky me. And then we know what happened. Tuesday the 7th, my 3rd or 4th day in the country, the Palisades fire broke out. As I was filming my last video for YouTube, I did an unboxing video of my Christopher Ward C1 Bel Canto. And as I was filming that video, that fire was breaking out. And I don't think, I'm going to be honest with you, I think hand on heart, everyone would say this, just didn't really think anything of it. at the time. What was more disturbing is as we went into the afternoon, the winds were picking up, and I could see outside the trees blowing quite violently in the breeze, and patio furniture outside, being blown around. And it's like, wow, I'm not used to winds that strong here, which are the well reported on, well documented Santa Ana winds, which, as we know, were fanning the flames of the Palisades fire. And on Tuesday afternoon, were resulting in it spreading at the rate of, I think they said, like 2 or 3 football fields, which is what, 300 yards every 60 seconds. And with aircraft unable to fly to combat this fire, and with ground crews just left to try and control it with hoses, there was no way that this wasn't going to become a huge disaster. And early evening on the Tuesday, realized this is bad. And then, of course, realized it wasn't just that fire. There was the Eaton fire out by Pasadena. And then there was the Hearst fire to the north of the San Fernando Valley. And then 7 o'clock on Tuesday evening, this is the first full week of January, so this is Tuesday the 7th of January, huge gust of wind brought down power lines where we are, and we lost power. And that is obviously just like, frustrating situation. You get the candles out, you realize you can't cook that evening. But when you consider what some other people were dealing with at that time, it's there but for the grace of God. But it's still a miserable experience to be somewhere without any electricity, any internet, any ability to heat food, do anything. And we kind of made the best of it that evening. But the thing that was really terrifying is if I looked out the window to my direct left here, which is looking to the north, we could see the Hearst fire. We could see the flames in the distance. We could see the flames moving down the hill. And from this window, it actually looked like lava coming down the hill. It was quite terrifying. And didn't sleep that comfortably on Tuesday night. There were evacuation orders, evacuation warnings, left, right, and center. And everyone was being told to just, kind of like, stay alert and just stay in touch with various kind of communication methods. And on the Wednesday morning, even though we were not still in an evacuation zone or even under evacuation warning, the misery of having no power and just realizing that we have got out of control fires to the east, the west, and directly north of us, which we can see, we decided, partly as a preemptive measure, but also just to kind of make things a little bit kind of less miserable, we decided just to skip town for a couple of days and decided to book a staycation at a hotel down in Orange Beach, in Orange County, down in Huntington Beach. So, yeah, we actually left LA. The other thing I should say is that if you went to the Los Angeles Water and Power Department website, their average response time for restoring power was 48 hours. So we knew that they wouldn't even get around to acknowledging that there was no power in this building for another 2 days. So that was another reason just to skip town. And then just like everyone else, just watched on TV and just watch the situation just go from bad to worse until the winds died down, the aircraft could get in the air, the air support was huge, and just trying to bring these fires under control. But the fact that after 1 week, the Palisades fire was still at 0% containment, and just watching people's lives disrupted and ruined, and the tragedy as we saw the number of people who lost not just their homes, but lost their lives in the fire as well go up, was just horrible to see. It was a genuine disaster, a genuine tragedy. News saying, the weather is one of the reasons I moved to the Dutch Caribbean 11 years ago. Those fires are scary. Stay safe. And that's what we did. We just stayed safe and stayed out of this area for a couple of days, waited for power to be restored. We did come back at that weekend, and obviously was in touch with my friend and colleague Joe, who's not that far from here. He's also in the valley. And he was in a similar situation where he was just kind of never lost power, fortunately, but was kind of just thinking about, do we just kind of preemptively get out of town, but decided to stay. And I think one of the reasons that he stayed, which was a very noble gesture, he was looking after people who were under evacuation order, especially when there was the Sunset fire, which broke out, I want to say, on the Wednesday the 8th. And luckily, they did get under control and managed to contain relatively quickly. That was terrifying because that was threatening a densely populated area. That was threatening like West Hollywood and kind of the outskirts of Beverly Hills. And I think that there were people who were under evacuation order that Joe was looking after at that stage. But yeah, and even into last week, it was a bit scary. We found ourselves, if we looked at the map, and everyone discovered this mobile app called Watch Duty, which was also available on browser as well, where you could look at like the state of all the fires, but also what all of the warnings, evacuation orders, red flag warnings for future winds and future potential fires, because that was the fear, right? With the winds continuing and with the drought here, just the risk of further brush fires. And all through last week, we were right on the edge of not an evacuation zone, but an evacuation order. So there was that kind of fear that if the Palisades fire did somehow start to move east instead of west, it was blowing towards the coast, but if it started to move east and cross the 405 freeway, that we might be affected. But also the red flag warning, the fact that there was the potential for further fires, meant that, we're on edge literally and metaphorically for all of last week. But thankfully and hopefully through the worst of it now. Still warnings in place, but I do think those warnings are always in place at this time of year, that there might be a fire. But the combination of just this extended drought, this lack of rainfall in Southern California, combined with these ridiculously strong hurricane-force winds, combined with a number, not just one, but a number of brush fires in densely populated areas, and homes that are built of timber, just created this huge tragedy, which was very, very sad to see. And thank you, Chert. Yes, I'm glad that we weren't adversely affected. A 48-hour power cut and being in a fortunate position where we could just stay at a hotel for a couple of days 53 miles south was, not problematic at all, not a major inconvenience at all. It was a weird experience. So, in that regard, glad that hopefully we are through the worst of it. And hello to Miles Miller. Glad that you're able to join the stream, Miles. You've just missed the depressing bit, Miles. You just missed me talking about the last week and a half, the last 10 days, and the impact of being here in Southern California during this horrible, horrible disaster. And yes, thank you, Tom, for your comment. Good to see you. Glad you're safe. Good to see you, Tom. Glad you can be with me. I guess it's late afternoon, your time. Time zones. Again, I have to get used to broadcasting during the day. It's a very, very, very weird experience for me. Used to doing this in the evening, and I appreciate it's evening in Europe right now, but it's early afternoon here on the West Coast. It's late afternoon on the East Coast where Tom is in Pennsylvania. So great to have you. Great to have you with me wherever you are in the world. And Miles says, "I'm glad I missed the depressing stuff." Yes, we move on to happier topics now. Definitely move on to happier topics. Because, as I said, this is, as advertised, meant to be about movies and more. And I'll happily answer any questions you may have, be those about movies or about anything else. But I'll also talk about some of the movies that I've seen in recent weeks. The first thing I'm going to do, though, for the fellow watch nerds out there, is what's on the wrist today. It is a Tuesday, and traditionally I do observe Speedy Tuesday. And for those of you who aren't watch people, there was a trend started, I think it started on Instagram a few years ago by people who owned Omega Speedmasters to make Speedy Tuesday a thing. And the idea is that Tuesday is the day that you wear your Speedmaster, and it's the day that you put a photo over on Instagram with the hashtag Speedy Tuesday. I mean, this was about 10 years ago, to be fair, but some people still observe it. But I decided to go with a Hollywood watch today because this is a movie-themed live stream. So I'm wearing my Panerai Luminor And yes, of course, this is featured in a YouTube video already. And the reason I'm wearing this one is that this is the watch that Sylvester Stallone made famous in the mid-1990s in the movie Daylight. Before filming Daylight, he had been on holiday in Italy. He was in Florence, and he went past the Panerai boutique. Panerai is a watch company based in Florence. And he thought, oh, I like the look of that. It's a bit different. That was a kind of like, interesting aesthetic. So he bought one, wore it in that movie. I think he then recommended it to his friend, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who then wore one in the movie Eraser. Terrible movie, but it's got James Caan in it. So, anything with James Caan in is never 100% terrible. And yeah, I know that these days big watches are not in trend. Everyone's going small now, but I do like the kind of totalitarian, kind of tooltastic nature of this Italian designed Swiss made dive watch. Anyway, that's the watch nerdery out of the way for today. If there are any fellow watch nerds watching, you can tell me what you've got on the wrist today via the live chat. A reminder that you do need to subscribe to the channel, which is 100% free. Now, I know I had the audio issues at the start, and I have no idea what caused that, by the way, because the meters were moving for me. I just had to literally switch the mic off and on again to make it work. The other thing you might have noticed, the tech nerds out there might have noticed, is that I've downgraded the stream today to 720. And normally, whenever you stream in 720, you have people telling you, like, oh, what is this? Like, the 1990s. So internet services in the greater Los Angeles area are still not back to normal. We just went through everything that's happened in the last 10 days, and it has still affected certain things like the internet. So right here, right now, upload speeds are minimal. It's like really impacting on services. So you might notice some choppiness in the video feed, and there is nothing I can do about that, but I've tried to mitigate it by streaming at a slightly lower resolution. So don't put me on your big ass OLED TV on the wall, because I might look a little bit soft, a little bit blurry. But hopefully the audio isn't too choppy. Hopefully the audio doesn't keep cutting out. That's the aspiration. Anyway. So a couple of things I just want to start with before we move on to movies. Did go to Vegas this weekend. First trip to Vegas of 2025. I know it will not be the last. In fact, I know when I'm going to be going back, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Did play a couple of poker tournaments. Made a final table on Sunday, cashed. Not going to say too much about that, mainly because tomorrow the Poker in the Ears podcast returns. Now, when I say the podcast returns, you don't get to hear it until Thursday, but we always record it 24 hours in advance. So Joe and I will be connecting tomorrow morning, my time, and we'll be recording the first episode of 2025, and that episode will be available for you to download or stream on Thursday. And of course, I'm going to be discussing the trip to Vegas, and of course, I'm going to be talking about the Global Poker Awards, which were announced today. The nominations were announced today. So again, don't want to go through those in too much detail right now. I'm going to save that for the podcast, but I will highlight that that's when I'll next be in Vegas, because the Poker Awards will take place at the Poker Go Studios at Aria on the 22nd of February. So I'll be back in Vegas towards the end of February. And I would highlight that my friend and colleague, Joe Stapleton, is a double nominee. Joe has been nominated for Best On-Air Talent, which is the new name for Best Broadcaster. This is the award which I was lucky enough to receive a couple of years ago. They've now renamed it Best On-Air Talent, and it's 4 US nominees this year. Jeff Platt, a previous winner of Best Broadcaster. Nick Schulman, another previous winner. Ali Najad, the reigning champ, and Joe. Now, I believe that Joe won the award for Best Commentator or Best Presenter when it was the American Poker Awards. This is going back 5 or 6 years ago now. This is pre-pandemic. But since they've become the Global Poker Awards, since they merged the European and American awards, I don't think Joe has even been nominated for Best Broadcaster, or as it's called now, Best On-Air Talent. So congratulations to him. And yes, Tom, I agree. Let us go Stapes. As Brent says, yay, Joe. And double yay, Joe, because in addition to being nominated for Best On-Air Talent, he's also nominated for his poker book, Best Book, even though it's got pictures, even though it's a comic book, Trapped, which I'm sure you'll have a copy of, and I'm sure most of you have read by now, has been nominated for Best Poker Book. So congratulations to Joe as a double nominee. I would also like to shout out my good friend, colleague, and former boss, Francine Watson, who for the second year in a row has been nominated for Best Industry Person. And I'm sure that you've heard me and Joe wax lyrical about Francine over the years. She's been doing this since 2004, was at the very first EPT event in Barcelona, and has worked her way up the ranks over the years to be series producer, executive producer of the EPT, overseeing the live streams and TV shows, has brought Shark Cage to our screens, brought back the big game and developed it into the big game on tour, oversees all of the content that PokerStars now make, and is very, very deserving to be nominated. And here's hoping that this time around converts that nomination into a win. Last but by no means least, there is a new category this year, and when we record the podcast tomorrow, we're going to be talking to Eric Denny, who is the president of the GPI, the guy who oversees the Global Poker Awards, and I'm sure he'll explain why they've added this category. We have the best episodic series, best TV show, I guess, but acknowledging the fact that most TV shows this year live online rather than on TV, so it includes YouTube shows as well. So the big game on tour, which I know we're all very, very proud of, has been nominated. And finally, Poker in the Ears, for the third or fourth year in a row, nominated for Best Podcast. So very pleased to see that. And hello to Gon, who says, hi from Argentina, James. I was saying earlier on, hello to you wherever you are in the world. I think most of the people, with the exception of Chert, watching right now, are in North America, but Gon is watching from South America. Hello from Argentina. Very, very happy to have you with us. So yes, that will be the podcast tomorrow, talking to Eric Denny, talking to Abby Merck, who's received a couple of nominations, plus some poker analysis from Nick Walsh, because I did get to play a couple of tournaments at the weekend and made that final table. So I've got a couple of hands or a couple of situations or a couple of general strategy points that I'd like to get Nick's take on. And Joe right now is at Run Good, the Run Good event in Tulsa. Congratulations to the Run Good guys as well for their nomination. So yeah, I'm sure Joe will have some things to say about some of the poker hands he's played at Run Good. So we'll get Nick to do some analysis. So there you go. There's a big plug for the podcast, talking about the Global Poker Awards, recording that on Wednesday, and that will be out on Thursday. And Nukua, happy to see the big game on tour nominated, as am I. Yay, sorry. I loved the big game on tour. I was a big fan of it as well. Really pleased with the way the shows turned out. And of course, we were at the NAPT Las Vegas, in November last year, November of 2024. So 3 separate tables, 15 new episodes of the big game on tour, coming out later this year, because those shows are now in post-production, and very soon Joe and I will start recording the commentary for those shows. Right now, not literally right now, but in January, February, and into March, we are doing the commentary for EPT Barcelona 2024. So that's the Barcelona just gone. What was also known as EPT 20, because it was the event that celebrated the 20th anniversary of the European Poker Tour. So those shows have pretty much been produced. We're now just doing the commentary, and then those shows will start airing on TV networks around the world. And for those of you in North America, Fox Sports 1, FS1 in the US, TSN in Canada. Those are the TV networks where you can see those shows. And of course, down the line, they'll make their way to the PokerStars YouTube channel, because I appreciate a lot of people just like to watch stuff as VOD and like to watch it for free on YouTube at their leisure. And Miles for One, can't wait for Big Game on Tour. A reminder that the 10 shows that were filmed at NAPT Las Vegas 2023, you can watch all 10 of those episodes on the PokerStars YouTube channel right now. And the new season, 15 new episodes, 3 new loose cannons, 3 really fun lineups. Those will start airing, I think, in the spring. I want to say May of this year, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'll just say spring. And later in the year, as I said, those of you who watch the shows on YouTube will be able to get to see it. And at that point, we'll know if it is a Global Poker Award winning show. First question of the stream, and this is actually going to, excuse me, lead me in nicely to the first thing that I want to talk about today. He says, unable to get the cap off his water bottle. Hello, Matt Tatler. Good to hear from you, Matt. And I know that Matt's a big fan of the Big Game on Tour. In fact, let's get to Matt's other comment first, actually. Matt says, love the Big Game on Tour. Enjoyed watching it and reviewing it too. Matt provides his reviews on X, formerly Twitter. Hope it does well in the awards. Good luck to everyone involved. Absolutely. And I think it's important to acknowledge, again, like last year where we won best live stream, or here where it's up for best episodic series. These are very much team efforts. This is something which an entire production team works on, and the whole team deserves the credit for that. So Matt's question, James, which decade do you think was the best for movies, and what films did you enjoy? So I am a huge fan of 1970s cinema. I think the 70s was a great decade for cinema, and it was just the perfect storm of a number of things coming together, which just resulted in a lot of really great movies. We saw the dissolution of the Hays Code at the end of the 1960s. And this was a very, very strict code that filmmakers had to follow if they wanted to have their films given the stamp of approval by the Motion Picture Association of America and their films shown in cinemas. So this predates the current ratings system. There was no X, R, PG-13, PG or G. It was simply your film either passed or it didn't pass. And films had to be suitable for everyone. And in order to be suitable for everyone, there was a very strict list of rules that filmmakers had to follow. And one of the classic ones is like the bad guys couldn't get away with it, for example. You could not have someone fire a gun and the person be shot in the same frame. It had to be a cut. You'd see Gary Cooper fire his revolver, and then you'd see the bad guy roll over in the dirt after a cut. And slowly but surely, we saw filmmakers try and challenge that code, and we saw filmmakers taking more risks. And some examples of where Sergio Leone started the revisionist Western in the 1960s with the Dollars trilogy. He didn't know about the Hays Code. He didn't know what you could and couldn't do. We had a filmmaker like Mike Nichols take Edward Albee's play Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and turn that into a film and tone it down to a certain degree, but still it was quite, hardcore for the time. And that was when they realized that the Hays Code was no longer fit for practice. And they introduced the new rating system, which enabled you to have adult-themed movies that would either have an R rating or an X rating. And I would say that in the late 60s, early 70s, the X was not the kiss of box office death that it is now. I think now they call it NC-17, and it's normally associated with hardcore sex, and X became synonymous with pornography, right? I think we're all aware of that. But it just meant that suddenly filmmakers could do more. And you could start to push the boundaries of what was possible. Plus, you had a new generation of filmmakers coming to the fore. And these were filmmakers who appreciated what the Europeans were doing. You'd had the French New Wave in the late 50s, 60s. You'd had Godard, Truffaut, and you had the filmmakers who were learning from them, who aspired to be like them, who were reading Cahiers du Cinema, and who'd studied film at university. So I'm talking about your Martin Scorsese's, your Francis Ford Coppola's, your George Lucas's, your Spielberg's. They're starting to come through. And you also had a change in the tide as far as the Hollywood studios were concerned, where you had the moguls who were now either retiring or selling, or in some cases dying. And so you had a new wave of studio management, and you had corporations buying Hollywood studios, whether it was Gulf and Western buying Paramount or Kinney buying Warner Brothers, and they didn't know the first thing about how to make motion pictures. And they were hiring people who had a little bit of experience, but who were kind of either former producers or passionate movie fans to run the studio for them. And these people started trusting these filmmakers, taking huge risks, and we had a lot of movies being made in that period which were really, really good. It was the era of the auteur. I'm not a huge fan of the auteur theory, which was started by André Bazin and Cahiers du Cinéma, and the French New Wave subscribed to it. And the idea of the auteur theory is that the person who wrote and directed the movie is the sole author of that film. And that's obviously a gross simplification. I just talked about the fact that, when you make a TV show, it's an entire production team that contributes towards the success of that TV show. And the same is true of a film. Every single person who worked on that film contributes towards its success. I don't believe there is a single author, a single artist who is responsible for a film. But equally, it's a balance, right? There are some filmmakers, especially those who write their own movies, produce their own movies, and direct their own movies, who probably have more influence and more artistic control than some others. So, yes, you did have movies which were quite auteur-led during that era. And this is all very well documented in Peter Biskin's book, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, which is about how these filmmakers just had all this power, all this control, all this autonomy, and they made some of the greatest films of all time. And I'm not going to provide you with a shopping list of movies, but I've already highlighted some of those filmmakers. Coppola made The Godfather Parts 1 and 2. He made The Conversation. He made Apocalypse Now, all in that decade. Bob Fosse made Cabaret and Lenny. William Friedkin made The French Connection, The Exorcist, and Sorcerer, which at the time I think was grossly overlooked and dismissed as an overblown remake of The Wages of Fear, but actually holds up really, really well. George Lucas, THX 1138, American Graffiti, and then changed cinema forever with a little science fiction film called Star Wars. Steven Spielberg made the first ever blockbuster with Jaws, followed it up with Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Some great movies, some of my favorite films of all time made during the 1970s. So another film that was made during the 1970s was The Deer Hunter. The Deer Hunter was made by Michael Cimino. And Michael Cimino followed The Deer Hunter with a movie called Heaven's Gate. So when I said that Matt's question was going to lead me in to the first thing that I wanted to talk about today, I want to talk about Heaven's Gate. Now, I ran a poll. Let's see how many people got it. Hold on a second. View your channel. Community. So I put it out there. I said that I wanted people to guess which notorious box office disaster I recently revisited and have concluded is a misunderstood masterpiece. And I put out 4 options: Ishtar, Waterworld, Heaven's Gate, or Cutthroat Island. Well, funnily enough, nobody said Cutthroat Island, which I think is a pretty terrible movie. I'm going to put my hands up. I've never actually seen Ishtar. One day I will get around to seeing it. This was a movie with Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman, which tanked at the box office. I want to see if it is actually any good, or whether it deserved to do no business. So let's talk about the other two, because 63% of people thought that I was going to be talking about Waterworld today. I have not seen Waterworld since it came out in cinemas in the mid-1990s. I remember enjoying it at the time. I thought it was a pretty solid movie. I love Dennis Hopper as the villain. I've always been a big fan of Kevin Costner. I think he gets a lot of stick. I do think that there was a little bit of he needs to be brought down a peg or two after the success of Dances with Wolves. And I'm never a fan of that when they go after someone. And it doesn't matter what they do. They're just going to get flack. And yes, Waterworld went over budget. Yes, it was a very difficult production, but it's a pretty solid movie. And I tell you what I love even more than the Waterworld movie. If you go to Universal Studios in Hollywood, the Waterworld live show, the stunt show they put on, is insanely good. It is incredible. It might be my second biggest, strongest recommendation at Universal Studios after the actual tour of the studios itself. But Heaven's Gate is the movie I want to talk about, which 25% of people thought I was going to declare today as a misunderstood masterpiece. And, Matt says good choices there as far as movies are concerned. Yeah, the 70s, a really solid decade. And Michael Cimino is one of the filmmakers who came up through the 70s. He made Thunderbolt and Lightfoot for Clint Eastwood, a film that Eastwood did with Jeff Bridges in 1974. He wrote the screenplay for that as well. I think before that, he'd co-written the screenplay for Magnum Force, the Dirty Harry sequel with John Milius. Then he made The Deer Hunter. And he won Best Picture, Best Director at the Oscars, and clearly whatever he did next was going to be hot property. And I've always been aware of the legend of Heaven's Gate. I tried to watch it a couple of times. This is back in the early 90s. This is when I was really getting into cinema and was very much considering studying film at university, at college. So I watched sometimes 2 or 3 films per day, which, was excessive, for a growing lad to basically come home from school, pull the curtains and just watch back-to-back movies. But I just wanted to educate myself. I just wanted to watch as many films as I could. And okay, this is the pre-streaming age, it's the pre-internet age, but at least home video was the thing, right? You could rent VHS tapes, you could buy VHS tapes. Movies were on TV, at least there was cable TVs, there were movie channels. So I was able to consume a decent amount of films. And Heaven's Gate, I remember, was shown on TV. This was the full-length version of the movie. And I watched it and I could never get into it. I could never get past the first half hour. I'm like, boring. And I think partly it's because, you're watching Pan and Scan 4:3, and this is an epic Western. This should be seen in in CinemaScope or Panavision as it was filmed in. But the story of Heaven's Gate, and I'm going to give you the very, very potted version, is United Artists backed the movie. I think the original budget was between $5 and $7 million. Cimino said it was going to cost $5 million. United Artists realized with contingencies it was going to come in at $7.5 million. Ended up costing $40 million. Within 5 days, Michael Cimino was 4 days over schedule and was running $1 million a day over budget. And I think what was clear is that the budget was not fit for purpose, but also Michael Cimino's perfectionism just resulted in them capturing maybe a second and a half of usable film per day. The fact that they would just sit there waiting for the perfect cloud to come into frame, or wait for golden hour, for the sun to be at the perfect height every single day to get that perfect shot. And that shot might just be a very quick pan left to right, and then it's a cut. So you're literally getting that one shot, and that's a day. And that's really expensive. But this is also a film made in the pre-CGI era. So if you're going to reconstruct a late 19th century town in Wyoming, you're having to build practical sets. You can't fill up, the top of the screen with computer-generated building tops. You've got to actually build those constructions. If you want smoke coming out the chimneys, you've got to light fires. You can't put that smoke in post or make it look convincing. I am not going to condone for 1 second the way that Cimino acted in terms of shooting 60, 70 takes of every single scene and misappropriating funds, quite frankly. But the evidence is there on the screen. So the turn of events is, I was aware of the legend of the book of Heaven's Gate, and people had always said there's a great book about the making of the movie by Stephen Buck. And Stephen Buck was an executive at UA. He was kind of I think he became senior vice president for production by the time the film was in post. And he decided to write this book after he was fired, funnily enough, about how this movie came about, why the decisions were made that were made, and how it ended up being. And I'd always wanted to read this book, finally got around to reading it. And after reading it, I'm like, do you know what? I need to revisit this film. I do finally need to see it. It's widely available now. And Cimino actually did a restoration of the movie for the Criterion Collection back in 2012. Cimino died, by the way, in 2016. But he did this restoration, And this is his definitive final cut of the movie, which is 3 hours and 40 minutes long, which was the original version he turned in. He was contractually obliged by UA to turn in a movie that was between 2.5 and 3 hours in duration. And his premiere cut was 5 hours. He managed to get it down to 3 hours 40. The movie was panned by critics at its opening premiere in New York. Everyone panicked. The movie was withdrawn from cinemas. They cancelled there was meant to be a premiere in Toronto and a premiere in LA. They cancelled those screenings. They pulled the movie. He went back into the cutting room, spent 9 months reworking on the movie, and then came out with a cut of the movie that was around 2.5 hours. I have never seen that cut of the movie. Very few people have, but apparently it's not very good. It's kind of like sometimes, it's like there was a shorter cut of The Godfather. Again, to go back to that movie, Paramount didn't like the fact that that was close to 3 hours. Coppola went back, created a 2-hour cut. Thank heavens that someone looked at it and went, "This is crap. Let's release the longer version." With Heaven's Gate, the shorter version was apparently just a mess of a movie. Didn't make any sense. Didn't have any of the kind of grandeur that the longer cut did, and it became one of the most notorious, biggest box office disasters of all time. However, the longer version has been appreciated in Europe for some time, has been released on the Criterion Collection. I think Cimino also was able to do a 4K digital restoration, restoring, I think, some of the color scheme, some of the look of the movie closer to how he envisaged it, rather than the sepia tone maybe that some of the shots had. Anyway, cut to the chase. I finally watched Heaven's Gate from beginning to end, and I think it holds up incredibly well. Now, one of the things that I think we need to say is that looking at it through a 2025 lens, I do think that we are more accepting now of movies that are longer. Not just movies in cinema, but when you consider how streaming services now lead the way. So when Martin Scorsese turns in his final cut of The Irishman or Killers of the Flower Moon, yes, these are movies that did get a theatrical release, but the vast majority of people saw The Irishman on Netflix. The vast majority of people saw Killers of the Flower Moon on Apple TV. These were movies that were funded by streamers and found most of their audience on streaming services. And I don't think many people watch those movies in a single sitting. I can put my hand up and say I didn't. I watched The Irishman, I think, in 3 installments, almost like a TV miniseries. I watched Killers of the Flower Moon in 2 installments. I have a well-documented weak bladder. There's no way I'm making it through a 4-hour movie without taking a break. So whether that was the filmmaker's intention, whether that annoys the filmmaker to know that that's how people are consuming their movies, that's just the nature of the beast. And being able to watch Heaven's Gate in installments, being able to pause it, come back, made the difference. And so that's point one. Point two, the pace of the movie is not off. And by that, I mean, if you are making a movie that has an elegiac tone, and if you're making a movie that is about a way of life, and you're trying to reflect the pace of life at that time, it kind of suits the content. And it's interesting. I remember going back to Martin Scorsese, he did a TV series about American cinema, and he did a great video essay on Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon, a movie that is set during the Napoleonic Wars. It's set during the late 18th century. And a lot of critics at the time said Barry Lyndon was too long. And a lot of critics dismissed it as boring, as a kind of glossy coffee table book, but devoid of substance. And it's a 3-hour movie, and they said it's too long. And Scorsese broke down a scene in that movie and talked about how slow, how deliberate this scene is. It's a scene between 2 characters, Barry Lyndon and future Lady Lyndon, Ryan O'Neal and Marissa Berenson. And it's where they kind of like meet and kiss outside for the first time, set to Schubert's piano trio, and almost cut to the music, but paced so slowly. Not sure if it's a single shot. I'm sure it has a few cuts in it, but it's a very, very slow scene. And Scorsese says it's deliberate. It's deliberately reflecting that this is the pace of life in late 18th century Europe. And the same is true of Heaven's Gate. The pace of life in late 19th century Wyoming is such that this movie that moves quite slowly is quite fitting. But the one thing that you cannot deny, and this is where I come to talk about the budget of Heaven's Gate, the money is up there on the screen. If I look at this movie and say, so it was shot in 1979 on a budget of $40 million, my go-to, as we all know, is James Bond. The James Bond movie that was made in 1979 was Moonraker. And that was made on a budget of around 30, 35 million. So if I look at what Moonraker cost and look at what Heaven's Gate cost, and I think, yeah, if that's what 35 million bought you back in 1979, I can see how this movie would cost 40 million. It's like the money is on the screen. It is a beautiful movie. It rivals only Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West, to me, as the most stunning, the most visually appealing Western ever made. Once Upon a Time in the West is probably my favorite Western of all time. It's one of my top 10 movies of all time. And Heaven's Gate rivals it as far as some of the shots, some of the compositions, some of the camera work, just moments that are quite literally breathtaking. And you think, wow, this is a filmmaker who knows what he's doing. And it tells a pretty solid story. And yes, the story is quite slight, and it's told over a long period of time. One of the other criticisms of the movie is the cast. People say that the performances aren't good. Strongly disagree. Chris Christopherson is very good in the lead role. Christopher Walken. When has Christopher Walken ever been bad in any movie ever? Even when Christopher Walken is in a bad movie, he is still good. He is good in this film. The supporting cast, incredible. John Hurt, Sam Waterston. Even Tom Noonan is in a small role in this movie as well. The only kind of contentious bit of casting, and there's a huge, multiple chapters about this in Stephen Bach's book, is Isabelle Huppert, French actress, in the role of the, American Madam, the kind of, the female lead, the female protagonist, who is a brothel owner. Too young and too French are clearly my two notes on this bit of casting. And the studio did not want Isabelle Huppert in this role. They wanted a big name. They wanted a Jane Fonda. They wanted a Diane Keating, both of whom said no to the movie, by the way. I think the problem is they could not present an alternative name who was willing to do this movie to shout down Cimino, who was clearly a little bit infatuated with Isabelle Huppert and wanted her in his movie. So the studio rolled over. She got the role. Look, she's a very talented actress. She's not bad in the movie, but the accent is slightly distracting. Her English isn't terrible. You can make out what she's saying. But more than anything, I just think she's too young for the role. So that's a kind of a mark against the movie. The battle scene, the finale, the final battle in the movie is incredible to watch. I think the other thing I would say about watching it through a 2025 lens, not just the fact that we are now more accepting of longer movies, we're now more accepting of movies with a slower pace. I also think the movie is incredibly relevant to where we are right now. The movie is about a time when immigrants were being chased out of Wyoming by corporate interests who did not like that these people were given the right to settle on land and were invading their country and threatening their way of life and stealing their cattle. And they basically came up with a very, very simple method to deal with that. They hired mercenaries, they hired gunslingers to kill these people and created a death list. And the fictional part of the movie is that it culminates in this huge battle, what's known as the Johnson County War, Johnson County, Wyoming, where you have the the homesteaders kind of like rallied by Chris Christopherson into forming this kind of militia army to rise up against these mercenaries who are being paid by the huge corporations, the huge ranchers to get rid of these people. But it's kind of it's a great piece of cinema, this battle, even though it's a piece of historical fiction. So the two things that are very hard to overlook when you watch this movie now, and again, knowing about the production and having read the book, having read Stephen Buck's chronicle of the making of Heaven's Gate, the fact that so many extras were treated poorly during the making of the movie is pretty inexcusable. But the thing that's really grotesque and makes it very, very hard for me to condone this film, and I know I sound like I'm praising it right now, and I sound like I'm recommending it. The treatment of animals during the making of this movie is despicable. And even at the time, there were various organizations, various charities, various protest groups that actually had banners outside cinemas, had marches outside cinemas to try and stop people from going to see this movie because some of the practices that were being used. There are literal cockfights in this movie. You know, he's filming an actual cockfight for the purpose of this movie. He did not use synthetic blood for some of the blood in this movie. He actually had it extracted from living cows to substitute for human blood in scenes where people were shot or were bleeding. An unfortunate tactic that was used in some movies of the era, even up to and including the mid-1980s, and historically had been used in all of the old school westerns in the kind of like 20s, 30s, and 40s, is tripwires. If you want to get a horse to fall down, if you want to have like a scene where a horse is shot, they would use tripwires, and that would often, harm the horse, sometimes fatally. So practices on the making of this movie, disgusting. And I'm glad that we're now at a point, right, where we have that certificate at the end of movies that you have people on set who are making sure, animal welfare consultants making sure that no animals are harmed, and you have that stamp on the movie that no animals were harmed in the making of this production. And I do think that the horror stories of what happened on the set of Heaven's Gate contributed towards us getting to a point where this no longer happens. So I'm not for 1 second going to condone that, and that does probably hold back this movie slightly. But I can't deny it's, there's a lot of positive things to say about this film, which was derided for so many years and was a box office disaster. Anyway, I want to move on from Heaven's Gate because I want to talk about some more recent films. We're in the middle of award season here in LA, so let's talk about some of those movies. And of course, any questions you've got, any comments you've got about any of these movies, please, let me know, and I'll get those too. And thank you for blowing smoke, Nukua. You are so knowledgeable about movies. Do you think you watch movies differently than the average person? Possibly, potentially. Partly self-educated. As a huge movie fan, as I mentioned, I just consumed so many films back when I was at school. I then went on to study film at university. So you're studying everything from the birth of cinema, so non-dialogue cinema from the turn of the century, the surrealism of Dali, the early special effects pioneers like Georges Méliès, the kind of pioneers of cinema like D.W. Griffith, Soviet cinema, Bondarchuk, Eisenstein, Dziga Vertov, all the way through to new German cinema and contemporary film. So you have all that embedded into you. And then I specialized. I did a couple of dissertations while I was at university on the films of Jean Renoir and also on the concept of neo-noir, which was a kind of modern day kind of reflection of the film noir aesthetic in films of the 1990s, like Seven and The Usual Suspects. And because I was a film student, I was lucky enough to get a gig as a film critic, not once but twice in my life. So during the mid 1990s, I was a film critic for BBC Radio, BBC Local Radio, and in the mid 2000s, like 2008 through to 2012, before I became a full-time poker commentator, before I joined PokerStars full-time, I was a film critic for the London radio station LBC. And I also, at some point in my life, was the editor of a syndicated entertainment news service. So I often did like junkets and premieres, so interviews with film stars and film directors. So to answer the question about do I watch movies differently than the average person? Yes, I probably do, but I do not ever go into a movie with this mindset that I'm here to critique this. I'm here to pull this apart, to break this down, to study the mise en scène and the montage. And I certainly don't go in with any agenda to attack the star or the filmmaker, even if I'm going into a film which I think is probably going to be bad. I go into a film wanting to enjoy it. I go into any film wanting to be entertained. And that has to be the number one mission for any film is, do I find it entertaining? Do I enjoy it? Has it enriched my life? Now, there are obviously layers above and beyond that. Does the movie say something about society? Does it have any, anything to say? Does it have meaning beyond what it is on the surface? These are all things which I think can take films to the next level. So yes, that's where you start to do the analysis bit. But yes, I probably do look at it through a slightly different lens. I do think once a film student and once a film critic, always a film student, always a film critic. Matt, thanks for the readout, James. Great knowledge of movies too. And again, best wishes to you and everyone involved in the big game on tour. Hopefully we'll become the winner. Thank you very much, Matt. And thanks again for your comments and questions. So I often joke about the fact that I don't like watching films in the cinema. I'm a bit of a kind of curmudgeon about this. And I do think that you get spoilt when you have been a film critic or when you've worked as a film reporter and you get to go to actual film screenings. You get used to a certain way of watching movies that you just then can't replicate. I'm all for movies being seen on the big screen, in the correct aspect ratio, with great sound systems, and cinema being a shared experience. I'm down with that. Two things to say. Not all cinemas are great. Some cinemas, the projection's off, like the film's not in the right aspect ratio, it's not masked properly, it's not focused properly. The art of cinema projection in the era of the multiplex is dead. I know I'm sounding really old right now, but I've been to so many cinemas where I can tell that someone's flicked a switch, no one's looking at the screen right now, and this is not right. I actually got up out of the cinema at a screening of Dunkirk at the Odeon Putney and went to complain because it was literally not framed properly. Sound, acoustics. Some other cinemas are old, or the sound system's not been calibrated properly. Are you telling me that every film you've been to see at the cinema, you understood every single word of dialogue? Modern sound mixing, where music and effects are being balanced at the same level as dialogue. I need subtitles these days. The reason I like watching films at home more than anything else is I can have the sub switched on, so I can actually work out what people are saying and I'm able to follow the story. I think persistent headphone use over multiple years probably has damaged my hearing, but went to see Dune Part 2 just under a year ago when it came out, the spring of last year. And I missed several key plot points because the acoustics in the cinema was so bad that I could not make out the dialogue. So yes, if you're in a screening room at Sony Pictures where they have perfect picture and perfect sound, it's amazing seeing it in a cinema. Some cinemas, not so good. One other thing to say. As far as the shared experience is concerned, seeing it with other people. If you watch a movie with other film critics, film buffs, film reporters, film nerds, It's fine because they're respecting what they're watching on screen. And again, I know it's a cliche, but like all cliches, it is rooted in truth. Cinema audiences do not know how to behave. Thank you, Brent. Modern cinema experience is often filled with other people chatting or eating noisily. If you have a great home theatre setup, it is a superior experience. I can't disagree with that. And it's not just the eating. And again, I like to personally just sit and watch a movie and then go and have a meal afterwards. I don't like the experience of eating in the cinema, but I can just about put up with that as long as people aren't like unpackaging like individually wrapped sweets. But it's people not being able to disconnect from their phones, just lighting up the cinema as they receive a text message or check on the football scores at halftime, or haven't silenced it, so I have to hear when they get a Snapchat notification or whether someone's ringing their front doorbell. And yeah, people who are just thinking it's perfectly fine to talk to the person next to them about, what did we see that person in last? Because that's how they behave at home. It just makes it a really, really kind of disappointing experience. If you can hear that, by the way, they're testing the fire alarms in this building at the moment. So we don't have to evacuate. I know that this is a pre-agreed fire alarm test, but crucially, we're not on red alert. You might remember how we started the stream, what we were talking about. Probably a good thing right now that they are testing the fire alarms in this building. So let's talk about some of the modern films that I've seen recently, and maybe some of you guys have seen these films as well. If you have, let me know. Shall I start with a positive or a negative? Do you know what? I'm going to alternate between the positives and the negatives. So, first movie, The Conclave. And again, most of the movies that I've tried to watch are movies that are being talked about during awards season. And look, I used to work in showbiz. I used to work in entertainment journalism. I get caught up in all of the awards season stuff. So whether that's the Golden Globes, the SAGs, the BAFTAs, the Oscars, I love all that stuff. And I know it's all smoke and mirrors. I know it's all kind of like nonsense, but it is fun, and I do get into it. So I am interested to see what movies are being talked about and what movies are being honoured. And I love the disagreements that break out and how you realise there are certain movies winning where you're like, well, why is that deserving of a prize? So The Conclave is a movie which is being nominated for and is winning awards. I think it won a Screenplay Award at the Golden Globe. I think it's nominated for more BAFTAs, more British Academy Film Awards than any other movie. And I think it's solid. It's an adaptation of a Robert Harris book. It's a thriller set in the Vatican about the election of a new pope and about the voting that takes place around it. And Ralph Fiennes is in the lead role and is brilliant. Ralph Fiennes is a great actor. Again, one of those people who always brings something to any movie, even if the movie itself is not that good. And he is very, very good. The supporting cast, excellent as well. Stanley Tucci, John Lithgow. Isabella Rossellini has a very, very small role in the movie, but is getting nominated for Best Supporting Actress. Considering the amount of screen time she has, that is saying something. More on Best Supporting Actress in a moment, because we're going to talk about another movie with someone who's being talked about for that. The Conclave. Enjoyed it. Good drama, good dialogue, good performances. Here's the problem. I saw it 2 weeks ago, or maybe a week and a half ago, and I've already forgotten a lot about it. I know The Conclave is going to be one of those movies which in 6 months' time, someone's going to mention, and I'm going to say, did I see that? It's good, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily great, and I wouldn't say it's particularly memorable. And that's not taking anything away from it. It's a recommendation. It's a solid 2-hour film. It's a good drama, but I just don't think it's up there as far as a top-tier cinematic experience, as far as a top-tier movie is concerned. And that's probably going to come across harsher than it's meant to sound, because it is a good film. It's a well-made film. It's a well-written, solidly, if not spectacularly directed film with a strong cast. And it tells a good story with a pretty surprising ending. I'm not going to do spoilers, by the way, for any movie that is kind of currently in cinemas or currently on a streaming service or currently on SVOD that you might not have seen yet. So I won't talk about the ending of The Conclave, but it's a good one. And it's a surprising one. So yeah, recommended, but I suspect it's going to be one of those dramas which in a few months' time, certainly in a few years' time, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, the Vatican one, right? And many of the details of it will probably have escaped my mind. Let's catch up with some of the things that you've been contributing. Andrew Johnson says, I spent 3 years reviewing films for a small magazine, reviewed tons of flicks in public theatres, and developed PTSD from cell phones and talking to neighbours. Yeah, I hear you, Andrew. It's tough. It's tough. Miles, what did you think of Gladiator 2? I loved it. So interestingly, Gladiator 2 is now available to watch for free here. And at some point, I probably will get around to watching it. I've been avoiding it because I'm stubborn. And I think Gladiator is a magnificent film. I remember this was during one of my eras working in film journalism, working as an entertainment reporter. So I went to a screening of this movie with no knowledge of it whatsoever. All I knew is it was a Ridley Scott movie called Gladiator, and it could have been about one of the American gladiators for all I knew. I had no idea that Ridley Scott had brought back the swords and sandals epic, a genre which pretty much died with Spartacus back in 1960, and had made this incredible film. And I absolutely love the original, and it's almost in many ways like a perfect movie, very deserving of the Best Picture Oscar that year. It stands the test of time, even though some of the CGI is a little bit wonky by modern standards. That's the problem with CGI, right? Is some of the practical effects, some of the model effects that you see in movies made during the 1970s and 80s has actually dated better than some of the early CGI from the late 90s, early 2000s, where you look at it now and you're a bit like, oh. Like if I look at, I don't know, the animatronics, the Phil Tippett work on RoboCop, on Ed 209, that is better than some of the CGI robots in some of the Star Wars prequels. But apart from that, I think Gladiator holds up really well. It's an emotionally engaging movie. You know, the ending is gut wrenching, and yeah, it's one of those movies which makes me cry. I was very disappointed when I heard that they were making a sequel, because quite frankly, it's a movie that I don't think needed one. I didn't want or need the story to continue. So I was a bit disappointed when I heard that it was being made. And yeah, I'm with you, Brent. I wasn't impressed by the trailer. I saw the trailer. I'm like, this looks bad. The trailer is meant to market the movie. And in the same way that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, some trailers missell movies. They do. Generally speaking, if a movie like this should have good marketing, and I was just like, no, I'm just not into it. And because of that stubbornness, because of my respect, admiration, and just like no, leave the original alone mentality, that's put me off watching it. The fact the trailer kind of looks wonky, that's put me off watching it. However, do I like Pedro Pascal? Yes. Do I like Denzel Washington? Yes. He's being talked about for an Oscar. He's been nominated for Supporting Actor Awards. So I will get round to watching it, and I will report back on it. Chert asking, did you see Better Man? I know it flopped in the US, but I loved it. This is the one where Robbie Williams is a chimp, right? What the actual... Again, this is a movie where I've seen adverts. I've seen trailers. I'm like, is this for real? I like Robbie Williams' music, and I'm interested in Robbie Williams' story. But this looks a little bit out there to me, and I will. Let's put it this way: I will need to be in the right frame of mind to see this. From what I've seen from the trailer and the commercials, again, I'm not overly convinced by the CGI, which I believe contributed tens of millions to the budget, which is why it's flopped in the US, because it's just, kind of cost probably too much money. Church says, yup, it's great. Okay, I'll put it on the list. Funny enough, this movie is not being talked about for awards. So this is not kind of high priority right now. But yes, The Conclave, that was number one of 4 movies that I want to talk about. So The Conclave, good, but probably in the few months down the line, pretty forgettable. The second movie I watched, which is not being talked about for awards and does not deserve any awards, it's available to watch for free on Max, HBO Max. It's a Warner movie. Juror Number 2. Wow. My screen icon, my hero, is Clint Eastwood. As a star and as a director, I have so much respect for Clint Eastwood. Love his westerns with Sergio Leone. Love the movies he made with Don Siegel. The original Dirty Harry. Hate the politics. Love the movie. The fact that movie has me rooting for a fascist cop just tells you how good that film is, because it's, as a piece of emotionally manipulative cinema, it's strong. But yeah, I mean, and over the years, some of his movies which were overlooked at the time, which are now being, people are thinking, actually, High Plains Drifter, The Outlaw Josie Wells, these are movies which should have been up there as, Oscar contenders in the 1970s. And then, of course, he got the recognition he deserved for Unforgiven. And he had an amazing run in the 2000s as a director with Mystic River, $1 Million Baby, the 2 movies about the Second World War, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima, Changeling, Gran Torino. He was on a tear. And then the last 10 years, most of his movies have not been very good. He was not the right director to do Jersey Boys. It was flat as a pancake. And Juror Number 2, they're saying this could be his last movie. And I'm almost like, I mean, it's worse than Workmanlike. It's just bad. It really is a bad film. The script is horrible. It's like, I was talking about it briefly with Joe, and he said it's terrible, but I loved it. I thought it was terrible and I didn't like it. And it's got some decent actors in it. Nicholas Hoult, Toni Collette, and a lot of people have made a lot about the fact that this is the first time they've been reunited on screen since About a Boy, where she played his mother, right? He was a young kid, he was a teenager, and she played his mother. Toni Collette's accent is all over the shop. Nicholas Hoult is fine, but he's not got a lot to work with. The script is filled with expository dialogue. I mean, there's a scene at the start of the movie where Toni Collette's character is on the phone, and in the course of this phone conversation, it's like, well, you are standing for election as district attorney, and you're now managing a really high profile case with this notorious murderer, and if you convict him, you're guaranteed to be elected district attorney. It's like, that's in literally 30 seconds of dialogue in this phone conversation, and I hate that. That is just lazy, crappy writing and filmmaking. And this is, to go back to what I was talking about with Joe, it's like a teenager saw 12 Angry Men and went, I could do a movie like that. It's one of the lamest courtroom thrillers I think I've ever seen. And none of it is believable. It's just, yes. To be honest with you, the less said about it, the better. I know that Joe has a mantra now, which is I don't like to talk down on movies, because I know that people put a lot of hard work into them, and I know that no one sets out to make a bad movie. But what I was surprised about with this film is how many people are giving it a high score, not just critics but audiences as well. And I literally can't see it. I literally do not see it. It was a very, very disappointing movie. So let's go on to something more positive. Let's talk about a movie, again, an awards contender, which I did enjoy, and that movie is Anora. And what I want to say about Anora is I initially got a Twitter account, as it was back then, back in 2009, at the urging of LBC, because they wanted me to create, because Twitter was all the rage in 2009. They wanted me to create a Twitter account where I could give an immediate, snappy response as soon as I'd seen a movie. So the idea is you go to a movie screening and then in 140 characters or fewer, because that was the limit back then, it's before it was doubled to 280, just give a one-line summary of this movie, your immediate reaction to the movie. And it's like, okay, I'll do that, which is fine. But sometimes I need time. I need to kind of like, I need something to kind of sink in and kind of like and resonate. And sometimes that immediate reaction to a movie is either too simplistic, or sometimes I change my mind. What I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way is that Anora is a movie that I liked after seeing it. If you'd asked me to give you an immediate review, I would have went, yeah, that's really good. But with the days that have gone on and the week now since I've seen it, I think it's brilliant. And I probably, of all the films I've seen that are being talked about for Best Picture right now, is probably my favorite and is probably the strongest contender. It is just, Mikey Madison is amazing. She is brilliant in the lead role. It is written and directed by Sean Parker, who infamously made a movie on an iPhone, but not being funny. We know the iPhone is a solid camera. It's not what you do with the camera. It's not what camera you use, it's how you use the camera, right? And he is very good at verite style filmmaking, and the camera work, the editing, all on pace. The middle section of this movie alternates between being terrifying and hilarious in a tonal shifts that work. And it is such a well-told, well-performed, well-made story. I would happily, gladly watch this again. I'd love to think I'd get more out of it on a second viewing. And I would say this is probably my single biggest recommendation, my highest recommendation of the movies I've seen so far, with the caveat that I have not seen The Brutalist, which people are saying very, very strong things about, and I think, again, could be a front runner for the Best Picture Oscar this year. But yeah, Anora is an incredible movie. Alan Saunders. Hello, Alan. What is your favorite quote from Jurassic Park 3? It is, of course, Alan. And good to have you with me, Alan. And I also think I'm actually able to introduce a guest. Oh, let's see if this works, shall we? Hello, Ray Windust.
James Hartigan. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Ray. How are you, sir?
Really? I'm all right. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Okay, so basically, I obviously need to explain. Ray is one of my oldest friends. I've known Ray for 30 plus years. I was just explaining at the start, Ray, when I was talking about my life as a film student and then as a film critic and my background in kind of film studies. That's where we met. We did the same film course together at university in Canterbury.
Absolutely, yes. Cool. Yeah. 30 plus years ago. I can't hear myself at all. Hold on, there we go. There, that's better. Yeah. Far too long ago, thinking about it now. I wish it wasn't.
As I said, it was 30 plus years. Next year it'll be 30 years since we graduated.
Wow.
But yeah, so Ray is one of my my old school university friends, a fellow film student and a fellow film fan. And
yes.
Yeah, so you missed my long reappraisal of Heaven's Gate, Ray. Which I've just said, I think is a misunderstood masterpiece. And I do think that through a 2025 lens, holds up incredibly well and maybe is better appreciated now than maybe it would have been back in 1980.
Wow. That could well be the case. I've not seen it in many, many, many years.
Yeah,
so yeah, no, I can't offer an opinion there.
Yeah. So obviously, I recommended that. I recommended The Conclave. I dismissed Juror number 2, which is Clint Eastwood's new one, which is really, really bad. And I have nothing but praise for Anora, which with every passing day, I just have fonder memories of and would love to see again. Just a really, really good movie. And I was talking about the emotionally gut-wrenching ending of Gladiator, the original Gladiator. The ending of this movie, the ending of Anora, is another emotional punch where you don't know whether to laugh or cry. I'm trying to avoid spoilers here, but yeah, I cannot say enough good things about Anora. But if you'll indulge me, because I doubt you've seen this movie, the one other film that I wanted to talk about, which I've seen recently, which is in the kind of in the offing, being talked about right now as a potential awards movie, is Emilia Perez.
Okay.
You heard of this?
No.
Emilia Perez is. I'll give you the pitch. I'll give you the pitch. Imagine you're a Hollywood exec, right? And I'm coming in as a filmmaker, and I tell you, I'm a French filmmaker. I don't speak a word of Spanish, and I speak very little English. I want to make a film in Spanish set in Mexico, but I'm going to film it in Paris, and it's going to be about a Mexican cartel leader who wants to transition to be a woman, and it's a musical.
Okay.
Somehow this got greenlit, and
okay. I'd be looking around seeing where the camera was, waiting for Aston Kutcher to turn up, because it sounds like it's everything that. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in that.
There's a lot to unpack, and this is the first thing is that I will say, and it's kind of like my kind of like one line summary. And I talked about, like, you know, if I had to give an immediate reaction to the movie, as LBC made me do on Twitter back in the day, and I'm going to quote Tom Hanks in the movie Big. I don't get it. That's my biggest problem with this film. I just don't get it. I just don't get the what people are seeing in this movie. I genuinely don't. And I think I don't buy the conceit of this being a musical. Now, you know me, I don't have a problem with musicals. In fact, I love a lot of musicals. And there are some movies which tackle quite heady subjects, which are quite dark films, which are musicals. Cabaret, for example, right?
And exactly, I was just thinking.
And granted, with Cabaret, with the movie, you know, Bob Fosse made it in such a way that all of the songs are actually performed at the club, right? So at no point does it take you out of the moment with this any kind of, like, you know, lack of realism, because suddenly everyone's burst into song. But nonetheless, it is a serious subject, and it's a musical. I don't buy the conceit. The songs it doesn't work for me, in the sense that every time there's a musical number, I'm a little bit like, this has come from nowhere and it doesn't necessarily fit. But the second biggest problem is, with the exception of 2 songs, the songs aren't good. The songs are bad. And here's the thing, if you're going to make a musical, the songs need to be good.
Yeah, absolutely.
The storyline is... maybe I would have been into it more had it just told the story without the musical element. And maybe I do think that decision, that conceit, was a distraction in some ways. I am not going to comment on the performances, because they've come under a lot of flack, right? You've got Zoe Saldana and Selena Gomez are 2 of the leads in this movie. And there's been a lot of criticism about the authenticity of their performances as Mexicans, in the fact that their Spanish dialogue does not sound realistic. I'm not in a position to comment on that. I did not have a problem with either Selena Gomez or Zoe Saldana. I'm also not going to criticize the fact that the film was shot in Paris, because I don't necessarily think you need to shoot on location. And if Stanley Kubrick can make Docklands look like Vietnam and can make Hatton Garden look like New York, you know, it can be done. So I'm not going to criticize the movie for that. I tell you, the weirdest thing about this is the top billed performer in this movie is Zoe Saldana. The lead character in this movie is the lawyer, played by Zoe Saldana. The person who has the most screen time in this movie is Zoe Saldana, who won the Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actress and is nominated at the BAFTAs as Best Supporting Actress and is likely to be nominated at the Oscars for Best Supporting Actress. And I know that when it comes to categories, it's all about how the studios market people, but this is nonsense. She is the lead in this movie. She doesn't play the lead character, doesn't play the title character. Sorry, she doesn't play the title character, but her character is the lead character. The movie is seen from her perspective. The story is told from her perspective. It is bonkers to me that this has happened. And the kind of other example I can think of this is where Silence of the Lambs, right, where Anthony Hopkins won Best Actor, whereas actually he should have been in the supporting category. This is almost like the flip reverse it of that situation, where the lead is in the supporting category. And it's a very, very weird situation.
Why do you think that is? I mean, what is it that's...
I just think it's the marketing. I just think that they probably looked... Again, you have to remember, it's the film industry, right? It's Hollywood. It's very, very cynical. So I do think that, generally speaking, they looked at the Best Actress category and realized that there's probably a bit too much competition in there, and they've decided to pitch for Best Supporting. And the irony is Zoe Saldana probably will win because she probably does give the best performance of anyone in that category, but it just does feel like kind of like the boundaries, the rules are being twisted. The kind of boundaries are being bent and buckled a little bit. And I was just talking about Isabella Rossellini in The Conclave, who genuinely does provide a supporting performance in that movie and has very little screen time and is nominated alongside Zoe Saldana, and it's like chalk and cheese. It's a very, very weird mix. But I do think, a strong contender in Best Actress is Mikey Madison, who's in Anora. Brilliant performance in that movie. And the other contender is Demi Moore. And I don't know. I've talked about this movie before. Joe and I talked about it on the podcast. And if you haven't seen it, please do track it down and watch it. And that is The Substance. Okay. And it annoys me. The fire alarms are being tested today. Funny that. A lot of the conversation I've seen about Emilia Perez is it's a daring, it's a bold movie, and it's the most out there movie of 2020. The Substance is genuinely bold, is genuinely daring, is genuinely risk taking, and is genuinely flat out bonkers. And I don't want to say it descends at the end, but it goes to a level that I would not expect any movie to go to. And the only criticism you could potentially level at it is that maybe it doesn't nail everything, but by God, am I always going to salute a movie that shoots for the moon and misses slightly rather than something workmanlike. So The Substance is definitely the most bonkers, out there, risk-taking movie of the last year. And Demi Moore is a very strong contender for Best Actress. She won at the Golden Globes. I think she could win at the Oscars. So there you go. I've run through my award contenders. So The Conclave and Anora, recommended, especially Anora. Emilia Perez, not so much. Not a fan. And yeah, if you haven't already seen it, The Substance is a good one. But yeah, one of the reasons why I'm glad you're here is that I said at the start of this stream, after I got past a few technical problems with audio, is this is a bit of an experiment. I didn't know whether anyone would tune in, and a handful of people have decided to sit here and listen to me ramble on for the last hour, and maybe more people will discover it. But I'm really just trying to get a sense of what is going to work moving forward, whether there is a place for a kind of a live discussion program in the future. But one of the things I do want to do is stream more games. And, you are one quarter of our inept PUBG clan, the Potato Clan. And so that is something that I want to get back to doing is doing our regular kind of like meetups online. Now I've got the PlayStation 5 up and running here, is get back into the PUBG streets and maybe experiment with streaming one of those sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. That could be a lot of fun. I think if anyone does care to watch us cacking about, and usually, I think, yeah, that was one of the first times I think Joe managed to figure out my prowess at PUBG is when I managed to blow the boat up that we were supposed to be trying to get whilst I was trying
Yes.
to chase after a bot. It didn't end well for anybody. We all went out in the blue. So
Yes. Yes. So just to be clear, just to be
there's
clear,
a
I mean,
lot of people who'd want to see that sort of thing.
yeah,
Sure.
I'm sure most people get the concept of PUBG, right? It's battle royale game. It's like Fortnite, only more kind of militaristic, and yeah, we're basically trying to get out
It
of.
was a forerunner to that to Fortnite, if I'm right. I think it was a
I
mod of
believe it started as a mod to a
yeah
different game. The
yeah
guy who created it did the mod to this other game, and then created Player Unknown, then created Battlegrounds. Um, Look, it's still there are many battle royale formats now. It's still one which is very popular with Twitch streamers and is very popular with like actual esports competitions. So it still has a place as a PC
Oh, absolutely.
game.
I think it's workable. I mean, I had a couple of pals of mine try and get me into Fortnite a few years ago, and hello, hi, Tia. Um, yeah, I had a chap trying to get me into Fortnite, and it was just or Apex Legends, I think was the other one, and it was just far too whizzy and bangy and stuff. I think that was the thing I first liked about PUBG was the, you know, being able to creep through the undergrowth and try and pick people off.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Um,
absolutely. Thank you,
but
Tia,
yeah,
for your comment, by the way. Yeah, and there aren't as many people playing it now, and people often joke, "Oh my God, are you guys still playing PUBG? What is this 2018?" But we play on the console version. We have a bit of fun. I said we're not particularly good at it. That's why we have the Potato Clan. But the incident you talked about, just to be clear, we had to get from one island to the other. So we drove to the shore because you saw a boat, and because you wanted to be dramatic, you drove our Jeep into the sea, so we all had to then get
that's
out of it.
right. Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes,
Then
yeah.
you drove the
Everybody
boat in
out.
the wrong direction, so you beached it. You then thought it would be hilarious to flip over the boat or
You
to get
can
it
do it.
offshore with a hand grenade.
You
Yeah,
can
but not
do
if you
that.
throw the hand grenade into the boat, Ray. So not only did you
Well,
blow up the boat, but then our backup option, which was to then drive over one of the bridges, was gone because you thought it would be really funny and dramatic to drive the Jeep into the sea.
I didn't think the boat was moored as closely to the shoreline as it was. So yeah,
Okay.
inadvertently scuttled it. So
Okay. So in summary,
that happens.
if you would like to see more inept PUBGery like that, let me know, because I think we'll try and make some of those streams happen down the
absolutely,
line at some point. I mean, I don't think this obviously it's not going to happen while I'm over here in LA, and it might not happen for a while. But at some point, I'm sure I'll experiment with streaming myself playing poker. But one poker game I can play is Vegas Infinite. So this is the game that PokerStars has made for VR. So basically, it's available. I mean, you can play it as a game non-VR. I think it's available on iOS, it's available on PC, but it's available on PlayStation VR and it's available on MetaQuest. So I am going to get back into the VR streets.
Was that a plug?
It was partly a plug for Vegas Infinite, but it was also a reminder to myself to basically find a way. And I know it can be done of getting back on the MetaQuest. Probably get my headset over from London, but get back and it used to be called PokerStars VR. It's now called Vegas Infinite, and I haven't since it got relaunched, since it got rebranded, since it became like this new kind of casino environment. I haven't been in there, so I want to. And I thought, there's something to be said about doing something for the first time and showing other people, right? So, kind of like, I know there's a way of casting from the Quest headset to your computer and then capturing that with OBS and streaming it. So, I know I can do a VR stream. So I need to get onto that. It's on my list. It's one of the two things on my list. One is getting the PS5 set up so that we can do PUBG sessions, and the other is getting the VR set up so I can do that.
What does it look like in there? Is it like the Lawnmower Man in there?
It's really freaky because after a while you kind of like the reality. At first, of course, it's all a little bit, hyper realistic, a little bit. I don't want to say cartoonish, I've not done any VR, so I don't.
Okay,
okay, well, one thing I will say, Ray, one thing I'll say, and bringing this to an end because it's been like an hour and a half that I've been talking and I've got stuff to do. But one thing I will say is VR fitness is the best. So there's again, this is a legitimate non-plug, but this is, well, I guess it is a plug, but it's me giving a personal recommendation for a game. So Supernatural Fitness is a VR app, and basically you can do boxing or you can do with battens, and you basically are doing like punching kind of these objects or hitting these objects, and you're getting an amazing sweaty workout in this VR landscape, and it is super cool. There are others you can do. There's like, the bloody lightsaber games, for heaven's sake. But yes, but I would say that VR fitness is definitely a way to go. I'm going to get one last plug in for everything because you join me at the tail end of this experience. I thought I'd be here for an hour max. I ended up waffling for like more than 90 minutes, and now we're coming up on like 2:40 in the afternoon, LA time. So yeah, thanks for coming in. By the way, I appreciate you popping by.
That's all right. I wanted to pop because I mean I do think that there's some mileage in doing something like this every now and then. I do, as you've proven yourself, here for an hour and a half, only planned an hour. There's the capacity to talk about stuff in a form that's good, and bringing others in, also fun.
Yes,
that's
yes.
It,
no, definitely try doing
it.
Yeah, I did a Bond stream a while ago, which didn't really go according to plan. We had some internet troubles with that, but hopefully get more people involved in the next one. Have more of a conversation about other stuff. But yeah. Thanks for dropping by, Ray. Thanks to everyone who did tune in live. Thank you for all your comments, questions. Really appreciated those contributions. And yeah, Chert, he's got to go to bed. He's got work tomorrow.
Oof! Everyone's got to be up early. I have over here. It's night time here.
Yeah, I'll make sure I say hi to Stapes and yeah, thank you to you, Tio. I'm glad you enjoyed the stream. Thank you to everyone who watched the stream. Looking to more movies. Ray, you got to come back now. Tio wants to see more of you.
Well, that's fair enough, Tio. Thank you very much. I'm sure you will.
Yes, but just a reminder, everyone, new Poker in the Ears podcast, recording tomorrow, released on Thursday, and just stay across social channels, and I'll let you know what else is happening with the channel and what else I'm going to be making video-wise in the coming weeks. PUBG with Ray, maybe, a VR stream, or maybe more conversation about Bond and or movies. As ever, let me know. Obviously, the live chat's going to be disabled after that, but you can always post comments if you're watching a replay or if you have some thoughts after the event. Thank you, Ray. Appreciate it.
That's all right, no problem at all. Anytime. But I'd like, next time I'll try and get me. This is the first time I've actually booted the laptop up in about. There's a little folder up here that says 2023. That's the last time I even had the laptop up. So I would have been here a little bit sooner, but I had to get the elastic band wound up.
Well, thank you to those of you who did decide to watch this live. Really appreciate it. And maybe we'll do this again sometime soon. But until then, bye for now.